Welcome to this episode of the Good for America podcast. I'm your host, former Congressman Bob Good, former chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Before we begin, I want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast, follow me on social media at Rep Bob Good, rate the show, and share it with your friends. Let's get started. I've titled this podcast, What Does It Mean to Be a Republican? And is anything non-negotiable for Republicans? What does it mean to be a Republican? And is anything sacred or non-negotiable for Republicans? I want to talk a lot today about the Republican Party. That's the subject. And I'm going to ask a lot of actual and rhetorical questions, primarily rhetorical because I can't hear your answers. But we are nearly halfway through the first half of the first year of the Republicans' full control of the federal government. So we're halfway through the first year of the Republicans' full control of government. So Republicans own everything that is or isn't different this year and next at a minimum. Again, Republicans own everything that is or isn't different this year or next year at a minimum. And by what definition would we say that Republicans are winning in terms of the long-term impact? That's a term the president likes to throw around a lot, or folks who identify themselves as MAGA like to say, okay, we're winning. But in terms of long-term impact, long-lasting behind this term of Congress or this term of the White House, there's been very little that's been codified into legislative action or that has been passed into law that would transcend a congressional term or transcend an administration. That would be, again, long-lasting changes that have been implemented by the Republican Party that can't be reversed by the next Democrat president or the next Democrat Congress, for that matter. In what ways are we somewhat permanently reversing the harm perpetrated on the country by the Democrats? When the Democrats had full control of government for the first 2 years of the Biden administration, they did not have 60 votes in the Senate, by the way. They had a slim majority in the House. They had the White House and an incompetent, incapable president, obviously, but they did a tremendous amount to advance their agenda, to pass bills into law, to codify into law Democrat policies, of which, by the way, we are still suffering under today, those policies, those spending levels, because Congress and the president haven't taken legislative action. So in what ways would you say we are permanently reversing the harm by the Democrats? In what way are we honoring and delivering upon the trust of the voters, the American people, who entrusted Republicans with full control of government back in November? On what basis are Republicans earning the majority in 2026? Republicans seem to be operating out of fear of losing the majority and thinking, oh, if we're careful, if we're benign, if we're vanilla, if we're tepid in the Congress at least, then maybe we will keep the majority, won't lose it maybe next year in the 26 midterms. Democrats, in the first 2 years of the Biden, Pelosi, Schumer regime, they had, again, full control of government, they were motivated to get everything they could done in case they lost the House. Of course, they know that Republicans would be unlikely to have the courage, the resolve, the conviction to reverse the permanent harm or the more long-lasting harm that Democrats had put in place. And you see that with many Republicans in the House and Senate being reluctant to reverse the policies perpetrated upon us, which they voted against, by the way, when the Democrats had control. So I think it's healthy and it's appropriate to take inventory, again, halfway through this first year of Republican full control of government, and to ask, what does it mean to be a Republican? What does it mean to be a Republican, or what should it mean to be a Republican? Is it anyone who seeks the nomination as a Republican and wears the brand of a Republican? Is that all it means to be a Republican, or is it more than that? Is a Republican just not a Democrat? Is a Republican anyone who simply isn't as bad as the Democrat? That's the rationale we always get in the general election. No matter how bad a rhino is, gosh, we don't want to primary a rhino because then we might lose the seat and then we might have a Democrat. Or no matter how bad the Republican is, how moderate they are, how weak they are, how rhino they are when they win the nomination. Oh, we've got to support them because they're not as bad as a Democrat. On what issues are Democrats becoming more like Republicans? Can you think of any? I can't really think of any. Again, on what issues are Democrats becoming more like Republicans? Democrats have gradually become more and more extreme, more and more radical, more and more leftist. And I can't think of any way the Democrats are coming closer to the Republican Party. But on what issues are Republicans becoming more like Democrats? I can think of a few, and I bet you can as well. Issues where Republicans are becoming more like Democrats. I would submit on spending. The last two administrations, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, had record amounts of debt added to the national debt, about $8 trillion each. And Republicans are reluctant to cut spending now. You see that in the big ugly bill, where it's going to have a negative $4 trillion impact on the deficit over a 10-year period to pass the big ugly bill, according to the estimates. Republicans seem to become like Democrats on entitlements. They don't want to reform Social Security and Medicare to preserve and protect them for the future generations, to save them when they're unsustainable. They certainly don't want to cut Medicaid. They don't want to cut subsidies, whether you're talking about farm subsidies or corporate welfare or climate energy subsidies from the Green Raw Deal that all Republicans voted against, but some don't want to cut. They seem to have become like Democrats in terms of tolerating illegal workers on farms and in the hospitality industry. Certainly, Republicans have become more like Democrats on the moral issues, where they've surrendered or at least retreated on those issues. So again, I have a number of questions for Republican elected officials and Republican voters. Is anything non-negotiable for Republicans? Is anything non-negotiable? Are there any red lines that we won't cross in terms of standing for, fighting for, being refused to surrender on or give up or cede ground on? Is there anything? What is that? Is anything worth truly fighting for? And I mean really fighting, meaning unwilling to give up, unwilling to surrender, willing to risk everything, willing to do whatever it takes. Is there anything worth the risk of losing an election? You could apply that two ways. Is there anything worth Republican elected officials doing that might risk them losing the next election? I mean, is it worth doing what's right by the country, what honors your principles, your convictions, if there are any, something that saves the country for future generations that might risk you losing the next election? Or is there anything worth risking that might, anything worth doing, fighting for, that might risk the majority, that might risk holding on to the majority? Is there anything that we won't surrender on, is there anything on which we won't surrender to achieve so-called victory, however we define victory? I think now is the time to ask these things. As has been said, if you don't know what you stand for or you don't stand for anything, then you stand for nothing and you'll fall for anything. And the time to know what you stand for, what your non-negotiables are, what your convictions are, what your principles are, what your core is as you go into battle, before you go into battle, ideally. So is there anything that Republicans will or won't do to win? In other words, is there anything that Republicans won't do to try to win an election, or won't give up on, or won't surrender on, or won't compromise on? That said, what is the point of winning? What is the point of winning an election or winning elections? What are we trying to accomplish besides just winning in and of itself? I can tell you that the campaign consultants, the strategists, the political operatives, the super PACs, and so forth, all they care about is winning. They don't care who the Republican is. They don't care what the Republican stands for or if they stand for anything. All they care about is winning. So for us, is it all about just having power or denying power to the Democrats? Is it just for the sake of having power? Having power for the sake of having power? Some of you might have seen the floor speech I gave in October of 22 during the, that would be October of 23, After former Speaker Kevin McCarthy had been vacated and he was removed as Speaker, or the motion had been made, I should say, and I gave the first speech on the floor making the case for why Kevin McCarthy should not be Speaker, should not remain a Speaker. And one of the things that I said is we can't be the party, as the Democrats are driving the bus off the cliff at 100 miles an hour, we can't be the party that's just simply willing to slow the bus down to 95 miles an hour as long as we get to sit up front in the captain's seat and wear the captain's hat because we have the majority. That can't be who we're about or what we're about, simply that we're just not as bad as the Democrats and we're going off the same cliff the Democrats are taking the country off of, but we're just doing it at a little bit slower pace. So what are our core principles as Republicans? Are there any core principles for Republicans? Is the Republican Party still conservative? On what basis, in terms of steadfast actions, would you be able to demonstrate that the Republican Party is truly conservative? And does it matter? Does it matter that the Republican Party is conservative? Or are we about anything besides not being as bad as the Democrats? Is our only rallying cry, well, we can't let a Democrat win? And for that matter, do we just have simple blind allegiance to a party or even to a personality, a particular elected official? Would anything make a Republican nominee or a Republican elected official unworthy of our allegiance and our support? Would anything? Or will we support the Republican Party irrespective of what they do or what they don't do? Will we support a nominee no matter who they are or what they do? What if a nominee only wins because of the lies, the smears that they perpetrate on their opponent, and they have more money and they have more resources to get that false message out to destroy their Republican opponent, and they only win with Democrat votes in an open primary? Are we then obligated just to support that Republican because they won and because they happen to be the one wearing the Republican brand in the general election? If we do, you can bet we're going to continue to get more Republicans like that. I know a little something about that personally from what happened to me last summer in my primary. Well, what if Republicans nominate an abortion practitioner? Again, if we have blind allegiance, blind loyalty to the Republican Party no matter what if we nominated an abortion practitioner, somebody who actually performs abortions, the ultimate pro-choicer? Many Republicans want to be pro-choice now. We used to stand for life from conception. Now we say, oh, that's a state issue, which the Dobbs decision, by the way, it's been falsely reported, falsely represented by President Trump and others, that the Dobbs decision turned abortion back to the states. Untrue, partially true, but not true in total. The Dobbs decision said there is no constitutional right to an abortion in an overturned Roe v. Wade. The Dobbs decision said it's up to the people's representatives to make laws governing abortion, whether at the federal or the state level. So it didn't remove the federal opportunity or even responsibility. It just said that there is no constitutional right to abortion, so abortion can be restricted by the people's representatives, by the legislators. So we used to stand for life from conception as a party, and now we just leave that issue to the states. And many Republicans, like our leaders here in Virginia, have fought, I use that term loosely, but fought for 15 or 20-week abortion bans, so-called, that essentially ignore about 99% of abortions, meaning about 99% of abortions take place before 20 weeks. So the rallying cry for Republicans has been, Democrats are for 100% of abortions, but we're only for 99% because Democrats want abortion up to the moment of birth with no limits, no restrictions, anytime for any reason, and you get to pay for it with your tax dollars. But we Republicans, we're only for abortion up to 20 weeks. And of course, that doesn't work anyway, because even if you're for 20 weeks, which isn't really for anything, but the Democrats run ads saying you're trying to ban abortion. So you compromise your principles. You try to become like the Democrats. They attack you as if you're the strongest pro-life person, which we ought to be. And most people aren't voting primarily on that issue anyway. And again, are some things worth fighting for? Do some things transcend politics? Do some things transcend elections? If anything should do that, it should be the issue of life, which is literally a life and death issue. Abortion remains the number one killer in America. It kills more people than heart disease. It kills more people than cancer. And it's totally preventable. It's totally preventable. But again, are we going to support a nominee no matter what? What if we nominated an abortion provider? Are we obligated to support that person as a nominee? What about, we used to stand for biblical and traditional marriage in this country as Republicans. Now we nominate and appoint to the cabinet gay men who are married to other men. What about when Republicans nominate or appoint the first Republican transsexual, transgender person? Will we support the Republican nominee just because it's an R and just say, you know what, doesn't matter who you nominate, doesn't matter how they get nominated, we're obligated to support the Republican no matter what? Clearly, the Democrat Party is the enemy of all that matters in America. As others have said, the Republican Party may not be the answer to all your problems, but the Democrat Party is surely the source of all the problems in this country, and that's largely true. But does the Republican Party still stand for those things that matter for America? Republicans used to stand for fiscal responsibility, less spending, less government. You could argue the Republican Party does not stand for that anymore. The Republican Party talks about it, but do their actions show they still stand for fiscal responsibility, less spending, less government? Republicans used to stand for individual responsibility and used to stand against the government as the nanny taking care of Americans. But now today, the Republican Don't Cut Anything Caucus, the DCAC, has about 70, 75 members in the House and probably about 30 members in the Senate who don't want to cut anything. They don't want to cut Medicaid. They don't want to cut Medicaid for able-bodied working age individuals without dependents. They don't want to cut Planned Parenthood. They don't want to cut public broadcasting. They don't want to eliminate the Department of Education. They don't want to cut foreign aid. They don't want to cut subsidies. And these are things that are all borrowed. We don't even have the money for those. Even if you agreed with the policy, it's bad policy with money we don't have. So again, what does it mean to be conservative? And on what basis is the Republican Party conservative? Does it matter? Do we even care? And what happens when the party, Republican Party in this case, becomes an objective to itself? That the priority of the party is not principle, it's not conviction, it's not issues, it's not policy, it's just for the party to have power, so that the party can stay in power, so the party can have power, so the party can stay in power, so the party can win elections, so they can have power, so they can win elections, so they can have the majority, so they can be in the majority. Is that all that matters to the Republican Party? And are we okay with that? I've used before an analogy of a football team comparing Republicans to the Democrats. So imagine two football teams. For the Democrats, the victory for their team or winning for their team means advancing the ball, scoring points, winning games. For the Republicans, victory is simply having more people wear our jerseys, because that means we have the majority. It doesn't matter what we do with the majority. It just matters that we have the majority, defined as more people wearing our jerseys. In fact, we don't have to do anything with the majority. We just have to keep the majority. We actually prefer not to do anything with the majority. We actually prefer to do something next time if we can keep the majority. Keeping the majority by having more people wear our jerseys tends to be how the Republican Party defines winning. And Republicans will take anybody on our team. Democrats, on the other hand, they'll kick you off the team if you don't do Democrat stuff. If you don't stand for what they stand for, the radical, leftist, Marxist, anti-American, anti-constitutional principles, the Democrats will kick you off the team and primary you and stand against you. But Republicans, we don't care if you're on our team and wearing our jersey. You can sit on the bench. You can score points for the other team. You can stay in the locker room. You're only required to wear our jersey and to clap and cheer for whatever our team does. That's how it seems for the Republican Party. It certainly seemed that way to me during my 4 years in Washington, and it seems that way to me as I watch the Republican Party today. Many Republicans, elected Republicans today, and many Republican voters have elected or embraced populism instead of conservatism. populism instead of conservatism. Populism is not a principle, it's not a conviction. Populism is relative, it's subjective, it's temporary, it's fleeting, it's what's popular today, it's what do most people want today. Populism is democratic, little d, democratic, instead of Republican, little r. In other words, the view of the masses instead of those elected to represent the masses. Populism is democracy instead of constitutional republic. Populism doesn't cut spending or anything that's popular. Populism talks about sending $5,000 Doge checks instead of using government savings to cut spending. Populism cuts taxes instead of, or in lieu of, cutting spending. Populism gives out free stuff. Populism changes with the times. Populism keeps TikTok, despite its threat to our countries, through Chinese influence. Populism keeps TikTok, it's despite the threats, because it's popular. What does it say about a party that it continues to fund the things that it says it opposes? That's what the big ugly bill fails to address. That's what so far Republicans have failed to do with their first 6 months of control of government, is to defund the things we say we oppose. What if a party continues to fund the things it says it opposes because it thinks it will help them get elected or get reelected? How can a party or a nation, for that matter, be conservative if it no longer protects innocent life or looks the other way at the killing of innocent life? How can a party be conservative if it no longer fights for the belief in absolute truth, a creator, or his natural law? How can a party be conservative if it no longer fights for the belief in biblical morality, the traditional family, the definition of marriage? What if a party no longer fights for individual freedom, responsibility, self-reliance? What if a party no longer fights for limited government, reduced spending, or fiscal responsibility? What if a party no longer places a premium on work or believes that people should provide for themselves, again, by cutting Medicaid and getting able-bodied folks back to work and off government subsistence? What if a party doesn't stand against generational poverty and a culture of dependency? But the good news is we, the people, this is still a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The good news is we determine what the Republican Party is. And sadly, the Republican Party does reflect us. It reflects who we voted for or didn't vote for, who we've supported or at least whom we've tolerated. And we should not permit our allegiance to be unconditional. We should not permit our votes to be taken for granted. We should demand that Republicans hold to their conservative principles, that Republicans do Republican stuff, that Republicans fight for the things that matter most for our country, that the Republicans show courage and resolve and principle, and that they're even willing to lose elections to do right by the country. And they just might win if they do the right thing by the country. The country may stand up and reward them for doing so. And if they don't do that, we should replace them. Not replace the Thomas Masseys and the Rand Pauls who are standing courageously and standing on principle. Those guys want to help us keep the republic, and so should we. So thank you again for joining me for this episode of the Good for America podcast. I hope you give a lot of thought to these questions and these thoughts on the Republican Party. I'm your host, Congressman Bob Good, former Congressman Bob Good, former chair of the House Freedom Caucus. Thanks for joining me. Remember to subscribe to the show. Follow me at social media at Rep Bob Good. Rate the show and share it with your friends. Let's keep the republic.